Look, I did what he said. I made a Keith Black EPO.
Wow, I should do that. What do you just go to your
Let's go to that. If you put your cursor over the upper right there, you'll get 3 little dots next to mute.
What do I hit?
You go to rename.
Oh,
and then just type in whatever you want. I changed my picture too. Look.
Oh, I love that, Keith.
I'm learning all kinds.
I gotta learn how to do that.
I know, that was easy.
I don't have time.
I hear you.
I got a call from a new potential client today.
Awesome. It's a good call to get.
It's small, but that's okay. It's all right.
Oh.
Figuring out a way to squeeze it all in.
Okay.
Hey Dylan, can you give me the ability to screen share?
Yep.
Hi Jen.
Hey, just get myself set up here over
How
here.
are you?
Good, how you doing?
Good, thank you. Your hair is so pretty like that. I love it.
Thank you. This is
Nice.
I didn't feel like doing anything to
I know.
today.
Well, we were just saying earlier, in the spirit of full disclosure, I don't know, but from working from home, there are mornings I wake up, I'm like, it's Wednesday. Do I need makeup today?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The only reason I look a little bit nicer than normal is I did have some calls today.
Yeah, exactly. I know it.
You have a good hair day when you don't need to go.
That's right. Oh, another Wednesday already. Here we are. I recognize Amanda's name from last week at least. Welcome back, Amanda and Chris.
And Deb. She can't hear us yet.
Deb Kaufman's in the house. Deb, thank you for the card. It was very nice of you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, you're welcome.
Hey, Deb.
Hello, hello.
Long time no talk.
Isn't it though?
Oh, Deb looks like she's got white wine.
I got
We
it
can't
all.
hear you, Deb.
I got white wine and I got my white dog.
Aw, how cute.
Simba got scalped. She had lovely long hair, but when things went yellow, the dog groomer opened and she's now scalped. But anyway.
Wow.
Really sad when your dog can have a haircut and you can't.
I was thinking the same thing, Amanda. I'll tell you, if I just gave myself a pedicure because, you know, I needed it. And I was out with flip-flops the other day and 2 people are like, where'd you get your toes done? I'm like, I did them myself. Thank you for noticing. Isn't it funny the stuff you notice now?
My daughter and I have been doing mani-pedis like on a very regular basis. And I'm actually pretty good at it. I feel like I've got another career in me in case I want to open a nail salon someday.
You don't, it's the old fashioned lemonade stand. Just put a little booth out front of your house.
Yeah.
And just right there in the front lawn, social distancing,
Yeah.
you know, curbside pedis. There you go.
I'll be over at 5:30, Vicki.
Okay. When I was in high school, I worked in a retirement community and I worked as a waitress, but I also volunteered there. And I would take a sign-up sheet in, and on Fridays I would go in and give all the ladies, I didn't do pedicures for them because I was not touching their feet, but I did manicures, and I would go room to room. I had this big basket and I would go to each of their rooms and I would they would pick their color out and I would paint all their nails. There was this one woman who had this resin ring that was her whole knuckle and it had like a dead bug in it. I will never forget it.
Oh, it's so funny.
But they loved it.
Yeah. I will tell you, my grandmother's in a nursing home, not in Philadelphia, at a different city. And so my mom will send me pictures and my grandma's waving like this and you can see her fingernails. My grandma's always had the nicest, like hardest, most beautiful natural fingernails. And now they are so long. It's so cute. She can't get them cut yet.
I think I'd do better setting up a white wine stand in front of my.
Exactly.
I do a
Yes.
job pouring in the glass than I would do any other activities like manicures, pedicures.
I'm limited. The police are across the street, so I have to be really on the down low, whatever I do. So I'm just saying.
You need a back door there, Deb.
Totally, totally.
I know we're at 4, but I can see a few folks are calling in. So let's just give it one more minute and then we'll get started. Let's see. It's nice to see some new faces and some repeat customers. Thank you for joining, everybody. Hey, Lauren. Hi, Lauren. How you doing? All right. I have 3 minutes after, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to HR at Home week number 9. Good to see everybody. As I just said, it's great to see some of the repeat customers and always great to see some new folks. Glad that you are finding these conversations helpful, and I'm glad to stay connected. In typical fashion, I'll just go over the agenda really quickly. As usual, we just want to stay connected with each other the best way we can and share some best practices. Keith has a pretty big update to give us this week, which will be good to hear from him in just a minute. And then I'll more formally introduce our guest this week, Dr. Fiona Jamison, when we get to her in a few minutes. And then, of course, as always, beverages are optional but encouraged. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Keith. And you might be on mute.
I was. Hey, everybody. And, welcome to week 38 of this, it seems like. It's not news to anyone, but I felt that it would be remiss if we didn't give a nod to the Supreme Court's decision on Monday, which formally and officially made into federal law the fact that you cannot discriminate against individuals because of sexual orientation or transgender status. Some of you may be saying, I didn't know you couldn't before, or I didn't know you could. And you know, this was something that states regulated, and even the city of Philadelphia, even though Pennsylvania didn't, but now it is codified in federal law. Everywhere in the United States cannot discriminate based on sexual orientation or transgender. The really interesting thing I wanted to just point out was that, as in the second bullet there, Justice Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion, which shocked a lot of people because of his conservative views. And equally shocking was the fact that Chief Justice Roberts was in the 6-3 majority. So that was interesting to a lot of people. So it's a very good thing, and something that has been long overdue, I think. But I think it was really interesting, and that's a little bit of a quote there from Justice Gorsuch. But, you know, he pointed out that it's not appropriate to look at this simply as can't discriminate against someone because of their sex means if they're male or female. And the example he used was if you have 2 employees who are both in love with a third employee, and one employee is male, one employee is female, and the third employee is male, and you terminate the male employee because he's in love with the other male employee. The only distinction you're making between employees A and B is the gender of the employee that you're terminating. Therefore, by definition, you're discriminating against them because of their sex. And I thought that just set it out so well for people who are having a hard time understanding. So just wanted to point that out. Again, for a lot of us, we have in our policies and procedures that you can't do this anyway, so it's not a big change. And for a lot of us in the state or city we work in, the law prohibits it, but we need to make sure that our policies reflect this everywhere now and that our training reflects it. But I just couldn't let this one go without commenting on it. And that's it for today.
We have a couple of comments in the chat feature, which I think everyone can see, but nice comments like, you know, long overdue. And one comment said, I love that they combined the L, G, B, and the T and didn't separate the opinions, which is exactly what you just said, Keith. So, so thanks, everyone. Any questions for Keith? We've also been talking as a group in terms of there seems to be a real slowdown in any legal updates related to COVID from week to week. And so we're talking about how do we potentially think about changing this call going forward to make sure we're still being relevant and current. So if you have any thoughts or suggestions, of course, please feel free to send them to Keith. His email will be on one of the slides that we present here. But we want to make sure people are getting out of this what the intention was. So if you have any thoughts or suggestions on other updates we could be giving, if there aren't COVID specific related updates from week to week, please let us know.
Yeah, and we won't be giving updates just for the sake of doing it. So I think we might kind of phase out unless there are, I mean, for a while we were getting hot and heavy there with new laws and guidelines coming out every day, and that's kind of dropped off. So I think we'll adjust a little bit, but if you want to see anything else, just let us know.
Yeah, great. Okay. With that, I have the pleasure of introducing our guest this week, Dr. Fiona Jamison. Fiona is the CEO of Spring International and a personal and professional friend. So I'm happy to have her with us. One of the things that we talked about for the last couple of weeks as a group with, Vicki and Michael and Keith and I and Dylan is, we always try to stay sort of ahead of the curve of whatever the hot topic is. And we had Fiona lined up for last week, and she was gracious enough to give up her seat for Jamil for obvious reasons. And it was an amazing response, and amazing feedback. And so what we thought we would talk about today, and we've gotten some questions, is how do we get our employees' opinions on returning to work? And now, how do we think about getting our employees' opinions around diversity and inclusion in the workplace? And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Fiona, and let you have the floor. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. And thank you, Shelley. And nice to meet you, everybody. Yeah, so we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago about, making sure employees have a voice. And this isn't a new topic. Making sure employees have a voice has been a critical part of sustaining any engaged workforce. And also maintaining a direct relationship with them and sort of avoiding any union activity. But what happened during COVID-19 is a lot of organizations postponed their employee surveys, they postponed town halls and large group meetings. And so a lot of the feedback that they were traditionally getting has kind of just been pushed off. And yet I think there's two topics that are really critical to get your employee feedback on today. One is the return to workplace, and the other is diversity and inclusion. So if we start off with the return to the workplace, a couple things. You've probably been spending an awful lot of time getting your organization ready. So, preparing the physical workplace, thinking about health and safety policies and rules. So your organization might be ready to return, but the question is, are your employees ready? And the only way to really know that is to reach out and gather feedback from them, whether it's through some kind of pulse survey or feedback sessions. But the research that we've been doing at Spring, we've found that employees tend to fall into three categories. And if you flip the slide over, you'll see the three categories that they're falling into. Employees, when you ask them, how comfortable do they feel coming back to the workplace? They're either what we call social animals. They cannot wait, like, get me back in the office. I cannot be at home anymore. Just give me people and give me a space to work. Then you've got another group of employees that we kind of think of as those cautious creatures. If you've ever spent any time watching squirrels trying to cross the road, they're like, no, not going to do it, not until it's completely safe. And those are the employees who are saying, I'm not ready. I may not be ready to get on public transportation. I may not be ready to be in a room with other people. And there's a significant portion of people that are still not ready for that return to work. And the last group is what we've discovered and named hunters. These are those lone wolves, the people who are like, you know what, I am doing just fine at home, and they're self-reliant. And the last thing they want to do is squeeze back into work clothes, commute to work again for an hour, and be stuck behind a desk. And they really feel that there's no need for them to do that because they feel as if they've been just as productive or high performing at home. So as an organization, you really need to be surveying your employees and understanding what proportion of people fill into these different categories. Because once let's say 50% of your employees are social animals and they want to come back to the workforce, that's great, right? You're ready, you're set up. But if it's only 50%, on the other hand, it could be that you only need one floor of your office to be ready and cleaned every night, right? Versus 2 floors. So understanding the proportion of your employees that fall into these different categories will really help you to figure out what your plan should be and whether you have some kind of phased roll back into the workplace. The other thing I'll say is by reaching out to employees and asking them this question, they're going to feel really valued. They're going to feel as if they have a voice and that you care about them. You know, they've seen some tremendous crisis communications happening through COVID-19. And so I think this is another opportunity to say, hey, we care about you, we're listening to you, and we're working with you, which is quite a big transition for a lot of organizations since COVID-19 has started. So what do you ask employees? If you flip to the next slide, you might want to consider some kind of reentry assessment. And I'm sorry, this is a bit of an eye chart, but there's 4 areas that you should probably ask your employees about if you're going to reach out and ask them questions. One area is health, one is preparedness, comfort, and support. And you'll see about a dozen questions here that you might consider asking your employees. I'm more than happy to share these with folks. We can send this deck out to everybody. But you'll see the kinds of questions include like how they feel the organization has handled this. Are they taking the appropriate steps of action? Do they feel satisfied with the communications they've received about the return to work? Do they feel as if their supervisor is effectively helping their teams, right? Because we're relying on supervisors even more now to kind of get employees ready to come back. Also, it is important to ask about their context. Are their employees traveling on public transportation? What does that mean to them? Does that mean traveling at a different time of day where public transportation is less busy, might be more approachable for them? Again, thinking about those cautious creatures, those squirrels that are like, not until it's 100% safe. Are there things you can do to make them come ready back to the workforce? And the last couple of questions around support are really about giving them an open-ended opportunity to share with you, what else can we do as an organization to support you in this transition? So all of these, I think, are really critical questions to ask and can be done very simply. You could program this into SurveyMonkey and send it out. You could, use an organization like ours, but there's a lot of different ways. You could even host like a session like this with your employees and kind of get them to give you feedback on these topics. And I think these would give you a really good sense of where your employees are sitting. The other area that I think is really critical for us to get feedback in is diversity and inclusion. We've been obviously measuring this for a long time. In fact, within Spring, we've been measuring diversity, dignity, respect, treatment, voice for the last 3 decades around more in the context of labor vulnerability and unionization. But the same logic applies. If people feel under-respected and they don't have a voice, they're going to feel excluded in some way in the organization. So we've all seen through, the last few weeks that, there's a business case for this as well. Beyond the sort of moral and social justice purpose for diversity and inclusion, there's a business and economic case. We know that organizations are stronger if they tap into a more diverse talent pool. They're also better able to serve their customers if they reflect the diversity of their market base. And they're also more likely to be productive if they have diverse teams. So there's a million reasons why to do this. The question is, where does your organization sit today? Have you ever thought about it before? And is your organization ready to actually be held accountable to some of this diversity and inclusion metrics that I think are going to be more critical moving forward? So one of the things that we're recommending is the first step is to do kind of an assessment of your organization. We work with some partners to come up with a maturity model of how organizations today are behaving in terms of diversity and inclusion. From, the fact that maybe your organization said, yeah, that's a good idea, we should do that. It's kind of found, they haven't really done anything yet, but they're beginning to believe it's a good idea. Through foundational, which tend to be those organizations who have started to maybe measure, how many men and women we have. They're reporting data, but maybe they're not leveraging it and haven't really built it into their practices, all the way up to strategically integrated organizations who are thinking about this in everything they say and do every day. So one of the first things I would recommend, if you're facing this in your organization with your CEO for the first time, you want to think about, where do I sit on this maturity model? And if you click forward on the slide, there's actually a free tool that you can use. This is something that's hosted on our site, but what it enables you to do, it's about 12 questions. It's a self-assessment. It will take you about 5 minutes to do. you can click through that assessment and it will tell you where you sit on this maturity model based on the practices you have within your own organization. So that might be something you might think about doing, just, you know, to kind of get a sense of where you're at. It will also give you a sense of how far you have to go, because this is not something that can be accomplished overnight. The only way to really truly build an inclusive organization is to go on this journey and have a strategic plan that may take you 2 or 3 years to really implement it. So you know, consider taking that self-assessment just to understand where you are. Let's say you want to get feedback from your employees today on actually, you know, how are we faring in terms of diversity and inclusion. If you take a look at the next slide, some of the things that you should be considering measuring around diversity and inclusion are listed here. In fact, there's 10 items listed out. An organization who's truly inclusive is where their employees are going to feel respected. They're going to feel as if they belong. They're going to feel as if they can bring their true self to work, whoever that is. They should feel empowered to contribute to each element of their job and their organization, and they should feel as if they have a fair chance to progress, equal to everyone else in the organization. So if those are the things that you want to accomplish, there's certain measures that you want to think about, and they sort of incorporate both elements of power and influence. And this sort of moves beyond the just, do I feel treated correctly, to actually thinking about the employee experience and the different elements of the employee experience. So these 10 things here are, you know, do I feel heard? Do I feel listened to? And is action taken when I do provide my opinion? Am I treated with dignity and respect? How often do I get to attend pivotal meetings? Am I involved in decision-making around my role or my department? Do I feel as if there's fairness in promotional advancement opportunities? Do I feel I get exposure to upper management? Do I feel that diversity of thought is encouraged by my team, by my boss, by my leader? And is leadership trust, does it exist, and is it transparent? And then the 2 last ones are really about, you know, psychological safety. Can I feel safe bringing my true self to work? So I think those are really 10 good, solid places to start. These are questions you can ask your employees, again, through a survey or some kind of feedback session that you have with different groups. So those are sort of 10 ideas. And the last slide is really just about, you know, let's say that you've done your assessment and you've identified you've got some weak spots and you've got some root causes. You know, you might think about an approach to addressing that. And this is a model, again, you can take a look at this after this call. But it's kind of a 4-step process that walks you through. Once you've got that information, you've gotten the feedback from employees, maybe you've assessed what your organization looks like by looking at your HR data, and then you start to, you know, create a strategy, a roadmap for how you're going to make changes, how you implement that roadmap, and then ultimately how you measure over time changes to your organization, whether it be the increase of more women in the workforce or more people of color at higher levels in the organization. So, you know, thinking about measurement right from the get-go really helps you to build towards that strategically integrated organization. So I just feel like I've just blurted a ton of information at you, but hopefully, you know, ultimately here, I think it's about giving your employees a voice, making sure you're asking them about topics that are critical and important to them right now, and using that feedback to adjust your HR practices and policies and how the organization runs to be a place where employees want to continue to come back.
Thanks, Fiona. I think some of us, or most of us probably have done some sort of survey in the past in our careers, particularly if we work in HR. But I think these 2 situations are certainly very unique in thinking about how we gather data. So I'll open it up to the group. There were a couple of pre-sent in questions, but let me open it up to the group. If anybody has any questions for Fiona, I'll let you take the floor first.
Fiona, it's Amanda Bizon. I like the 4-stage approach and the questions on the D&I. My assumption, but I want to get confirmation, is that this really has to be inclusive of top leadership, right? That they're comfortable with this survey, they're comfortable with the questions, and that there's been agreement that what we get is answers we're going to work on. I'm just fearful if we go out and start doing this, and we have information and we don't make changes, that people could get really more upset with senior leadership and organizations.
It starts at the top, and I'll give you a perfect example of this. I had an organization reach out to me, and they created a diverse group or work committee that was going to work on this. And in sharing kind of an approach and a way of thinking about this, the CEO was in the room and was very, very quiet. And halfway through, I stopped and I said, "I'd love to hear your perspective on this, current CEO." And he leaned back, crossed his arms and said, "I'm not saying a word because whatever I say, I will get in trouble. And I just want this group to deal with it." And so the follow-up, we continued through the meeting, but the follow-up to that meeting was, this isn't going to work unless you're on board and you're comfortable with it. So sometimes the first step is really spending time with the senior leadership team to get them comfortable with what this means, what the implications are, what some of the changes might be, and getting them on board and comfortable with it, even if it requires some training before going out and gathering feedback. So yeah, it's a touchy subject for a lot of people who are not ready to talk about it. So it was a great point.
Fiona, it's Deb Kaufman. So I'm asking you to get your crystal ball out. So when you get your crystal ball out, for those companies that have been doing, your clients that have been doing year-over-year surveys, it's probably too early to see any trends, but are you expecting the macro environment issues out there now to have a similar macro impact on some of the surveys? Of course, it's always, depends on your company, but we have so many macro events going on. I just wondered if you're theorizing they're going to affect individual surveys in similar ways.
I think so. I'm already seeing it. So, some of the larger organizations that I'm working with are moving away from the traditional off-the-shelf, 10 questions engagement survey to doing things that are more in line with these new issues, right? So not that engagement isn't important anymore, but I think there's some more pressing issues that people need that, I think well-being is something that is, really important to employees today. And so we're seeing them ask about this. I think there's going to be sort of a sea change in terms of HR policies. Just in terms of the HR role, I've seen it become way more powerful in the last 12 weeks, right? A voice that often wasn't heard before, or engagement was their job. Now suddenly it's like, oh, we need your help. And in addition to engagement, we want you to think about health and wellness and diversity and inclusion. And so the things that they've kind of been fighting for years, they're not having to fight for anymore because there's sort of this macro environment that's saying it's important now. So it's kind of like having a burning platform. The same happens many times when an organization is faced with a union campaign for the first time. Right before that, heads of labor relations are going, oh, by the way, we need to be careful because we may get a campaign. And it sort of sometimes falls on deaf ears. The first minute they get a petition or a card signing, they head right to that office and say, we need help, and throw money at the lawyers to make it go away. This is a little bit like that, right? There's a bit of a burning platform for these things to happen.
That's a great analogy. Thanks, Fiona.
Fiona, one of the questions that came in advance, and I think it's certainly very appropriate for what Amanda and Deb have asked. I'm sure in your work life, and for many of us, when we do any kind of survey, it's how do we know that the responses are anonymous, right? I mean, that's a very normal question. The question that came in advance was particularly around diversity and inclusion, which I would argue is a much more sensitive topic than just generic engagement. And if you work for a really small organization, what advice do you give in ensuring confidentiality around those responses?
So, I think there's two things you can do. One is use a third party so the data goes outside the organization, because then it's easier to protect the identity of individuals. The second is to make it truly anonymous. Make the link generic so that anybody who links in, you can't identify who it is. The challenge with that, honestly, though, is that then you don't know who's responding. So you don't know whether the person who's feeling misrepresented or not respected, you don't know whether that's a man, a woman, someone of color, or someone not. So attributed surveys are still going to give you greater information, but I think sometimes having a third party do it enables you to have that firewall that gives employees that sense of, okay, I feel better because someone else is handling it and my boss isn't seeing the results, or
Right.
I'm going to be blinded in the report. So I think that's one of the ways to get around that.
Yeah, just my perspective, having been an HR practitioner for a long time, what I used to say to people is, if we don't know about it, we can't try to tackle it. And if you don't want to respond to the survey, but you trust me, then come talk to me or someone on my team, and we'll figure out how to incorporate that into the results, right? If you're too embarrassed to say something like, I'm the only Hispanic person in my team, and we know that your team is in customer service. Well, by the way, we now know who you are, right? Versus just coming to me saying, this is an issue on my team and can you help me deal with it? I can sort of weave that into the action planning. So I think there has to be some level of trust and at some fashion. Maybe it's an HR business partner on my team, maybe it's me, maybe it's somebody else in my department, or it's through the survey. But if you are unwilling to say, what I try to convey is if you're unwilling to say something, then I can't try to address it. So it's a double-edged sword, but you have to feel comfortable sharing the data in the way that makes you feel comfortable. And that's what I have tried to do over the years anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think I just saw a question come in, but it disappeared.
Okay. Let's see, there's a couple. So Pam Seplow said to a question earlier, just be prepared. It might be obvious, but if your organization isn't prepared to do something, perhaps you shouldn't ask, which is sort of the age-old, don't do an engagement survey if you don't want to do something with the results.
Exactly.
And then this one, are you guys able to see my screen? Because I have it up here, or I don't know how this shares, but okay. It says, where do you believe diversity and inclusion should be housed? Is it HR or reporting directly to the C-suite?
So I have, among my client base, I have it in both situations. I will say any analysis that we've ever done on D&I has usually come through the legal team. So when we've done like large scale employee engagement surveys, the request for a deeper D&I analysis has come through legal. And then goes straight back to legal. So it's almost, it's sort of safe house there. It also depends, I guess it depends how your organization is structured. But I think, we've created over the last few years a number of real-time dashboards that have both talent acquisition data, employee engagement data, and exit data based on different diversity metrics. And for those, there's a subset of the HR team that has access to it. So it's limited even within the HR team who accesses those kind of deeper dive dashboards.
Great. Other questions? Let me check the chat feature to make sure I don't miss any others. Fiona, I have a question. I have a client that did a survey about a returning to work probably, I don't know, a good 6 or 7 weeks ago. And a lot of what was shared, it's a large client, about 900 people, a large company, sorry. And a lot of people have, the biggest part of, and they ask a lot of the questions that you had indicated, sort of trying to get personal with folks. And a lot of people had indicated, their parents and their schooling, they're homeschooling their children, and it's become very difficult. And it will be difficult. And so what would your thoughts be around how to, uniquely create surveys? Every company, everybody on this call has a different situation. How do you uniquely create those surveys to get the right data from your employees?
So one of the questions that we typically ask on the return to workplace survey is, how much sort of additional support do you need outside of the workplace? So it gets people to identify whether they have like dependents that they're taking care of, or are living with someone who is high risk, and so you kind of get them to sort of classify themselves into those different levels, and then you're able to look at the results by those categories. So I've got those questions available if anybody wants to email me.
Without saying, are you a parent, right? So it allows people to identify if I'm taking care of an older parent or a grandparent or something.
Kind of what dependents you have, not specifically, but I have dependents that I have to take care of versus not. But I think we have to be very careful to give equal opportunity, even for those people who may still be cautious about coming back to work but don't have any dependents, right? I think that's also a critical voice that needs to be heard, because, for example, I have some younger employees in my own organization who don't have kids, who are single and live by themselves, but they don't want to get on public transportation. Like, heck no, you know, and if they don't currently have a driver's license, that means they've got to suddenly invest in a car, get a driver's license. And, you know, so I think we have to think beyond just, or be careful that we're not over supporting those that are in, not that we can't support them, but just be balanced in our response and providing a variety of options for people.
I'd love to hear if anyone's had any experience doing surveys so far, and maybe what objections or roadblocks they're running into within their organizations on how to overcome those.
Can I share one other thought?
Yeah, of course.
For some of our larger clients who have a lot of employees who have traditionally taken a survey on like a shared computer or training computer, let's say in a retail setting, and you know they'll go to the training room and use the training computer to take the survey, they're like, I'm not touching that machine after 30 other people have been on it. Yeah. So, you know, as you're doing these things, the ability to do it on someone's personal smartphone or, you know, a non-shared device, making sure you have that option available, or a paper option that they can submit, because I think, you know, that there are even health concerns with shared, you know, technology today.
Yeah, that's a good point. Other comments, lessons learned?
I think my biggest lesson learned. Hey, everybody. How you doing, Shelley?
Hi, Alan.
Always got one. Fiona, how you doing? I know Fiona too. How you been?
Hello.
How you been? Yeah.
Good.
I love what you shared. My biggest thing I always wonder is like more or less just kind of the assessment, how the company and the business owners receive the information, and like how we make sure essentially they're heard or the employees are heard. I know that in itself, more or less, I know you work with business owners to make sure that like, hey, here's the data. You have to, this is a mirror holding it up to you. I think employees, sometimes when they fill out the assessment, I know I've been guilty in the past of, I can say whatever I want in this and they're not going to acknowledge it or listen to it. So how do you bridge the communication between employee and employer to make sure the voice is heard and everything's going to be taken into consideration, given more or less the pandemic we have going on now, the racial injustice we have going now, and just how everything's tense. It's like, how do you bridge that gap more than anything?
So I think the biggest challenge I've seen is actually like decision fatigue. Like a lot of C-suite people are like, I've got to make so many decisions and now I've got more information to make another decision. And our philosophy has been, just communicate. It's okay to say we're not ready to do anything yet, but you have to acknowledge and you have to say, here's one thing we're doing today, or one thing we're going to focus on. Like, forget an action plan for 3 items and it going down to the local level and all of that typical action planning hoo-ha, right? Mm-hmm. It's really focusing them on what's the one thing we take away from this today that we can focus in on today, and communicate that. Because if they try to boil the ocean, they're going to fail miserably, and employees just want to hear, oh, they got it, they heard it, and they're moving on it. So, you know, I say to my team, when you're sharing results today, don't give them 30 pages of information. Give them 1 page with 5 items on it, and circle the one that needs the most attention today and that we think will have the greatest impact on the employees, and encourage them and even provide them with talking points of what to do, because you make a good point. You don't want this to just disappear and become another report on the shelf, because employees over time will say, I'm not going to bother. And this is critical feedback. So,
absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. I want to add something, and anyone else is happy to chime in, but I always have 5,000 questions. But I learned a lot last week listening to Jamil, and I have spent a lot of time, almost all of my time since last Wednesday, interviewing diversity consultants for a couple of my clients, because they take what's happening very seriously and they want to make sure their employees understand it and make sure it's really incorporated into their business practices, and that their employees truly believe they feel heard and are listened to. And I would love to hear from anybody or Fiona, of course, certainly, you know, what have you done in the last week to sort of move this diversity and inclusion information gathering forward since last Wednesday? I'd love to hear other people's ideas and thoughts. Anybody?
Well, I would love to give you something, but I'm unemployed right now. So
Oh,
I was just going to add, you know, we're continuing to talk, Shelley, and I'm sure you're aware, like putting together more panels, continuing to educate
yeah.
not just our internal team, but educate the community and pull people together to provide information and put it out there through our connector series, through putting our Disrupt HR, which is next week, which we already, if you haven't signed up, sign up quickly, because I think we have 300 people signed up in the past 24 hours.
Yeah.
So, but really educating our team and just talking. We're also just having really frank, open conversations. Not being comfortable enough to have the hard conversations about things that are bothering you, things that have affected you, and people are actually embracing it. I think they feel liberated.
Yeah. One of the things I learned, you know, I thought about it, and I have a ton of notes from Jamil last week, and he said something really interesting. His first thing said is, if you're going to give it legs, don't let it fizzle out in the next couple of weeks or a couple of months. Like, it has to be sustaining and long-term. And then he said this, you know, this anti-racism and social injustice is separate from your business goals. They're two separate sort of fights or agendas, right? And then this whole concept of allyship. And I had this perspective that companies probably have a short-term need to talk about, to have open forum and dialogue, like Vicki just mentioned, and to feel comfortable talking about it. And that if an employee of color needs to express him or herself, that their supervisor, who may not be of color, feels comfortable allowing them the space to talk about it. And then how do you align some of this, these initiatives to business strategy? So I saw that as sort of two things. And a couple of the consultants I spoke to said, you got it wrong. You're missing the mark, Shelley. What you should do is talk to your employees first and get data. So hence this conversation with Fiona, get data. And then from the data, you start to dialogue about what you see in the data. And maybe that means you have separate subgroups of employees, including a group of allyship people, or maybe it's everybody together. And then from those discussions, you start to create the short-term and long-term strategy. So I thought they were sort of two separate things that could run together, but it really is get data, have conversations, and then start to think about strategy and continue to have the conversation. So it's been, for me personally, extremely enlightening to have conversations with experts in this area and learn really how to integrate it into business practices, and then, you know, really give it life. So anyway, I've spent a ton of, probably more than 50 or 60% of my time since we hung up with Jamil last Wednesday at 5 o'clock, talking to people to try to help some of my clients do exactly just that. And I've learned a ton in the process. So it's been really educational. And I think the data gathering is the part that I'm really starting to think about now, which is, of course, which has been helpful talking to Fiona, is how do we make sure we get it right how do we make sure we ask the right questions the first time? Because that will be the basis for these future conversations that companies will have.
Well, and I think I'll just add to that one of the things that we saw happening with employee engagement and at the beginning of COVID was that employees wanted to hear from the CEO. Like in the past, they may have had, you know, communications kind of cascaded through the organization, but when a crisis happens, I want to hear, what is the top girl or guy going to say? Because they're the ones who are ultimately steering the ship. And we're seeing the same here. Like I belong to this Vistage group of CEOs, and there's been a ton of information shared. And I would say the organizations that are progressing the fastest are those where the CEOs have come out and said, we are going to have this conversation. We are ready to listen, and we're going to start asking for your feedback. And I think that's tremendously powerful, to Amanda's point at the beginning, when it comes from the top, right? That, you know, people, they want to hear from that person at the top, because ultimately if that person isn't on board with this, whether it's even open dialogue, you know, you could speak until the cows come home, but if nothing changes, what's the point? So I think organizations who have the CEOs who are willing to stand up and say, this is how I feel about it, be humble, be open, and be willing to listen, they're going to see much more progress quicker than those who don't, where it doesn't start that high.
Yeah, to Vicky's point too, I've seen a lot of, to use your word, Vicky, I think people feel a little bit more liberated and hopefully free to ask questions. I have a client, I spoke to the CEO just a few minutes ago before the call, and she said people are starting to ask questions like, what does our board of directors look like? How many minorities are on the board? Which employees generally never think about the board of directors for any reason, right? And now they're starting to ask questions like, if we are going to have a really inclusive organization, does it really go all the way to the top? So to above the CEO. So I know we're just sort of scratching the surface, but I just feel like in the last couple of weeks, at least the dialogue has been, at least the people that I talk to, the dialogue has been way more free flowing and open. And for me, a tremendous learning experience just in the last week alone.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
This is Mary Villa. We don't by any means have all the answers in my company, but our CEO has been doing just what you mentioned, Fiona, actually saying that he wants to go on a listening tour actually with employees and have conversations. And one of the things we're still struggling with is, what does that look like? And will people feel like they can, are they open to talking to the CEO about this? So, we're looking at, how do we make this work in a way that, enables people to really be honest and open. He is a very open guy, but I don't know, if someone much further down in the organization is really going to be comfortable telling the CEO what, he or she really thinks and feels. So we still need to work through all of that. But one thing our chief operating officer did really well, and I'd recommend this to anybody. Last week, we have weekly like town hall meetings now, virtual. And he actually came out and said that he realized just how, I'll say, ignorant he was, and how he, really doesn't understand, what he needs to understand in the Black community, for example. And he just put it out there in a very open, very humble kind of way. And we had a number of employees actually write him letters afterwards, thanking him. Members of our Black community in particular, just saying they'd never heard, a senior person do that before. So, I mean, if you have leaders who are willing to do that sincerely and authentically, it can go a long way, obviously.
And what, that's a great example, Mary. And one of the things that we've seen an increase of since actually beginning of COVID is the use of online focus groups, because they provide an opportunity for employees to come on anonymously and have open dialogue, not just with the moderator, but with their colleagues. And so as a leader, you can observe the groups, but you're seeing participant 1 say something, participant 10 say something. So that provides a sort of it works almost like a chat room, but that provides this sort of anonymity where people might not feel comfortable talking directly to the CEO and saying, well, it's me, Fiona, because I'm sitting in front of you, right? Versus in an anonymous online forum where there's being very open questions asked, they can, as participant number 32, share exactly what my experience has been. And so I think there's tools and technology there that can facilitate some of that and increase the comfort level if leaders are willing to try them out.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Unsolicited sales pitch for Fiona. I forgot that Spring offers that, unlike most other survey companies, where you literally can have a focus group and people could be typing in anonymously, getting better details about the question. So that's a fantastic thing. I forgot that you offer that, Fiona.
And I had forgotten too. That's
really
great. I was trying not to be too salesy. I'm sorry.
No, you're right. And I forgot the question that came in earlier. That's a perfect way for that person. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for the question, Mary.
I like the idea.
Hey, it's Jen. Can you all hear me okay?
Sure can, Jen.
Okay. Hey, I lost my video of you all, so I just wanted to make sure. I wanted to go back a moment ago. There were a few comments about CEOs, putting out statements. And I wanted to share that I was on a call yesterday with a few other colleagues who, a few of them shared that their CEOs had done the same, internal and or external statements supporting racial justice, very clearly coming out to say Black Lives Matter. And of course, the majority of the response was very positive. Many employees were thanking them. And unfortunately, it was really discouraging to hear that some of the responses were negative. There was a little bit of backlash. And so I think we all, just need to be prepared for that, and kind of think about how we work through that and, coaching the CEOs to, just reinforce that they are doing the right thing and, we're not going to please everybody. But I thought that was worth mentioning.
Backlash in what way, Jen?
Employees actually saying, I disagree with that statement. I don't think you needed to say that. Primarily white employees.
Interesting. I've also heard a couple people say, thank you for making the statement internally, but what about externally? Are you going to tell the whole public that, so that's and I learned that from Jamil, I think last week as well, if I recall. That's also quite important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think that's a sort of a very, in a lot of situations where CEOs make statements, you're never going to please everybody. And the trick as a coach to a CEO is always to say, well, let's not focus on the one squeaky wheel, right? Let's look at the range of opinion and then manage our response accordingly. So sometimes it is about, coaching them to look at the entirety. We have the same issue in engagement surveys, right? Where they see the one negative comment and they're like, oh, everybody feels this way. No, it's just the one you're focusing on. So, I think the same applies here, that it is the broader lesson that they're learning that is more important. So, but it happens with a lot of things, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I also think one thing that I've heard come up over the past week is, okay, this is all well and good that you make this statement and you put this is what you believe and this is, what you're putting out to the world. Now what? What are you going to do about it? What are you doing with this now? You said it.
I agree with you, Vicki. This is Michelle Burdell, and I think it's great that the CEOs and the leadership are putting out that statement, but they also have to very quickly put together a plan of action, because when people just see or hear the statement, they think of it as a reactive or reflective. So, so you have to build the statement and then an action so that it is not just the statement of the day.
Yeah, exactly. I completely agree with that, Michelle. And I think that's why, it's an important first step to do the assessment of where your organization is, because don't be making statements about how strategically integrated this is going to be moving forward if this is the first time you're thinking about it, right? It takes time to fix some of the systemic issues that exist in organizations, like how people are, reviewed in their performance, or how people are, looked at to get promotions. There can be so many systemic issues that are going to take time to fix. So I think having a strategic approach that's going to be stepwise and phased in is critical. So, yeah. One of the things I've suggested even to my own group of CEOs that I sit with is to take that little assessment, sit in your room by yourself and answer those questions and figure out and be honest with yourself about where your organization is. And if you are at foundational, then you've got a lot of work to do. So, I think going through an exercise like that can help them to realize and recognize that it's not just a platitude and a statement that they say.
Yeah, I was sharing with someone earlier, and it was my first job in corporate human resources when President Clinton and Monica Lewinsky scandal broke. It was my first job in corporate HR, and I spent a year doing sexual harassment investigations, because I think while there might be an extreme example, there are other subtle examples of what harassment might look like. And I think it just brought to light what that meant. And a lot of those investigations were things like saying, you can't say, oh, you look cute in that skirt today. Like a man can't say to a woman in the workplace, right? Because that could be perceived in one way. I definitely feel like we're on the cusp of another movement like that right now. And that we're going to spend a long time talking about what's happening in the US now for all the right reasons. And I feel like it has the right amount of legs. And I think those companies that are going to be successful at it are going to do just this and take action, and not just put a statement on their LinkedIn page, but continue to have dialogue, get employee surveys, take action. There are going to be mistakes made. No one's going to be perfect. But I think those companies that will survive at the end through all this will replicate sort of what happened then. I don't think this is going away anytime soon, which is great. And I'm glad we're having these discussions. It'll be interesting to see where we are if we do this in 6 months from today, right? Like what kind of discussions we're having then, in, what would that be? December 6th, 17th. That'll be fascinating to see what we're talking about then, for sure.
I definitely agree with that. The thing I wanted to bring up is I was talking to a business owner of a small business, and he was facing an issue in regards to, I can't post anything or I can't say anything because literally I'm a small business. I can't afford like $100,000 to leave this way or $200,000 to leave that way. I have to kind of stand non-biased on an issue, even though I feel a particular type of way. And the thing that I latch onto is when we went deeper into the conversation about essentially his workplace and the population and the demographic and who he employs. When he mentioned, he was like, I employ everybody, but he's still facing issues in regards to lack of diversity. And I latched onto the statement when you're like, hold the mirror, business owners have to hold the mirror to themselves and kind of ask them the genuine question of, am I changing? Am I leading a change? Or more or less like, am I honest about the way my organization makeup is? And my question is like, what happens if these business owners just truly aren't? Because from this conversation I had with this individual, he was like, he hit me with the whole, I employ everybody. You know what I mean? I don't care if they're this. I can't stand that statement, but you know what I mean? If they're black, blue, yellow, vermilion, opal, amethyst, you're like, I don't know how you have all these colors. But anyway, they say that. But at the end of the day, like their demographic still is all white. And then it's like, okay, I don't even know how to take this conversation further if you're not trying to listen to that point. Like, what happens about the people who genuinely are not honest to themselves?
I'll give you my opinion. I think those employees will ultimately vote with their feet.
Yep.
I think if you care about diversity and if you care about working for an organization that respects that and treats you with dignity and you can have a voice and be heard and have equal opportunity, then you're going to stay with that organization. If you're in one where you see that or feel that, you're going to, and especially right now, the job market is opening up and people are going to be rehiring. I think those employees will vote with their feet.
Agreed.
Yep.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
At least I hope they will.
Yeah.
People stay in bad places for unknown reasons.
Yes.
Building on a point, Shelley, that you just made with your Bill and Monica example, I think another consequence of this will be that employees test the waters a little bit more and come to HR more frequently because they feel, I don't want to say permission, but it's in the limelight right now. Maybe they feel a little safer coming forward. I think we need to be aware of that responsibility on our end and go the extra mile and not make them feel, that they're brushed off if they do come forward with, hey, I haven't been comfortable here, but I haven't been able to say anything in the past. We need to be extra aware of that, I think, and really make them feel that they are in a psychologically safe place to do that.
Yeah. That's why I thought what Jamil was saying last week was so important. And again, how I personally just learned so much over the last week, just asking questions. I believe in my heart that I respect and have people in my life of all different backgrounds, and it's true, and I do, and I love them all the same. But there's certainly things I need to learn more about being an HR person in the workplace that my personal life doesn't transcend there. And so, how do people perceive me in that way versus just being my friend or my neighbor? So it's been really eye-opening. And I think if you have been in a position where you've been in the forefront as an HR professional or another leader leading your organization through the change of COVID, and you've been in the forefront of just like throw all the rules out, throw the rule book out and just figure out the way to get people get home to work. And you've been a change agent. Hopefully people are seeing that in you. And to your point, Keith, they're now going to come to you for other reasons because they've seen you maybe behave in a different way to help them be successful at home. I don't know. It's certainly been a really interesting 13 or 14 weeks to work in the human resources space, more than the last 25 years or whatever the number is. It's been a wild ride for sure.
I think what you're saying is really critical because not only with what Keith was saying as far as if they come to HR and they don't get a response that they need, regardless of what that is, or if they don't come to HR and they sit around and are disgruntled or turned off by what their manager's side comment or may or may not have meant to say.
So this is a real hot button. It's just, you know, how we handle this is going to be really critical, I think.
Yeah.
Great point, Andrew.
Yeah. Well, another really engaging hour. This has been great. Fiona, thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't know about you guys. I always take away several nuggets. So I'm appreciative of our time. And certainly if you have any other questions or thoughts of future topics you'd want to hear about, or if you want to highlight something that your company is doing very well, would love to have you join as well. Have a good week, everyone. Be safe, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.